Today we have the wonderful Andreas, creator of GlobiFlow. So you called yourself, I think I got it from LinkedIn as well, a chief digital strategist at Globi Web Solutions.
When I first started using Podio, I was still running a web design company. And after a few iterations with Podio, I started using it for CRM and project management, you know, the usual stuff, internal stuff. And with the CRM, it very quickly became evident we needed some kind of email capability. And that's when I built GlobiMail, so that from your CRM in Podio, you can send emails, receive replies, all in context, all with the lead right there. Then the next thing that became evident was we needed some kind of automation because Podio didn't do very much. And, you know, you give me an API, I can't help myself. So in a weekend, I cobbled together the first version of this GlobiFlow, which didn't do much, but it did basic things like it could update category fields on an update, things like that. Then I needed some way to do mass edits as well, and that's kind of how Supermenu started to be born. So Supermenu was first just a menu of your most popular apps, so you can choose them, and when you click on the Podio logo, you get a big ass menu of just that. So it was a very quick way to navigate, but the killer feature in Supermenu is if you're on any kind of app screen, you can pick a view, and then you can click the sheet button, and you can edit the entire view as a spreadsheet. So if you want to do like a mass update, you can just update, like, let's say, for example, you want to update a category field, you just update one of them, then you can do a copy and paste them into all the remaining rows, and you can just do a mass update. And also, one of the other features in Supermenu is any multi-line text field, you can edit it with Supermenu, which allows you to insert images, do better formatting, all the things that Podio's MCE version doesn't do. And after that, I started working more and more on GlobiFlow, which, by the way, for those who don't know, what today is Podio Workflow Automation is GlobiFlow, same product. And it got more and more features over time, like things like, you know, building PDFs, sending emails, receiving emails, the webhooks, the external CMS stuff, MySQL syncs, more actions, more actions. It was my pet project, and it was kind of born, as I said, out of my own needs. So every time I had an itch, I'd scratch it with GlobiFlow and I'd build a new feature. I need to do X, so I built feature X. And then Citrix started kind of courting me, and we got into talks, and we did some licensing deals, and eventually GlobiFlow was acquired by Citrix back in, good God, when was that?
2016, 15?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Around there somewhere.
Quite a while ago. Almost 10 years ago. And when that deal then finally went through, I could no longer create new features that I needed. And I still had new features, and by that time I built quite a big community in Podio, and these users had new requests for features, and some of them were cool. It's like, I need to be able to do that. And there was no way to do that. But because GlobiFlow had a remote post action, the next step was to build a new hosted system where you could post some information to, it could do something, and then return a reply. So that was kind of version 1 of ProcFu, which, coming back to your question there, Kelly, it kind of was for processed food, like Kung Fu. And, you know, coming up with a new .com these days is kind of hard. So ProcFu eventually was the name. And I started adding more and more functions, they're called, in ProcFu, as people were requesting them, as I personally needed them myself. So the basic premise was, from GlobiFlow, you do a remote post, get a reply, it would do something. The next big thing that came out of that then was doing mini apps or portals, where you have your data in Podio, but you want your vendors, your customers, your users, whatever, to be able to interact, not just see, but interact with that data. And that's when the portal builder came by, where you can, like in minutes, build a portal on top of your Podio data. Those are the two big features. I feel like I'm forgetting one. But yeah, those are, I guess, the two big features in ProcFu.
The two big deployment management. I know that's
deployment management.
Good one.
It's not very much used because it's a little bit more complicated. But the way that Podio allows you to kind of package up a space in an app pack, and then you can distribute that and install it somewhere else. The ProcFu deployment manager is similar to that, where you can package up a space, but it doesn't just take the apps. It also takes all the flows you have in GlobiFlow or in PWA and makes them part of the same pack. So when you then install it, it'll install the apps and the flows. And you can have some limited variables inside your flows so that when you do install them, they could be customized to the installation destination. And then those deployments, you can make them public so anybody can install them. You can require a secret key because each one has a secret key. So if you can distribute or sell that secret key, somebody could then install your app pack using that. And then the other version is that it's completely private and only you can install it. So you go to any space, pick the app pack and install it there.
I love that. And so does Martin Evans. He commented that he loves it.
Thanks, Martin.
I think a lot of our partners use it pretty frequently. That's awesome. So I'm just curious, and a lot of this is for everybody listening. We didn't have too much of an agenda. We obviously want to showcase ProcFu, but I'm just curious, from Andreas, like, what is your actual background? Like, did you go to school for this? Did you just happen to find that this is what you do well in? What is like that part of your background?
That part.
That part. The pre-GlobiFlow and GlobiMail.
Well, it all started back when I was 12 years old. I got my first Commodore 64 and I was hooked on coding ever since. I guess my relevant background, I'm an ex-SAP programmer, and that taught me very quickly to have zero fear for technology, for tables. Like if you work in a system that's got thousands or tens of thousands of tables, I have no fear going into those kinds of things. And it just kind of overlapped into what I do now.
I think it kind of shows, and this is all my opinion, it kind of shows in the things that you've built, I think. Like when I first saw GlobiFlow, when you sold it to Citrix, I was on the support team and I had to support it. And I was like, oh my God, like I didn't know where to go because it just looked so clean. And I was like, I don't want to touch anything because all I knew was Andreas built it. Oh my God, Andreas, like you're very, very famous internally and externally to us. And same thing with ProcFu. So having that understanding now of like your background, at 12, I wasn't doing that. I was playing in the creek and catching frogs and doing that kind of thing. I wasn't playing with computers. So very, very interesting. Good to know. Now that I can understand your mindset and your background a bit, I understand how you built certain things and why they kind of have the Andreas edge to them. Joel, I think you'll agree. We always can kind of tell at a glance if, oh, did Andreas build this? It all has a very similar look and feel.
That's because I'm not a designer. And most of my drive comes from fixing problems. So if there's a need for, even if it's just something small like a feature, or there's a specific problem that needs to be addressed, my fun part is about fixing that problem or creating that feature. Then the stuff that happens afterwards, like making it look pretty and easy to use, that doesn't interest me. So often that kind of gets missed. And that I think is what you're referring to with it's got my look and feel. It works. Move on.
Well, and to be honest, like I've always been so impressed that you are able to build so quickly, especially when you have your foundation of your product done. If somebody comes up with an idea and you're like, oh, that's a good idea, like I could use that. Like Andreas doesn't wait, 6 months down the line and then maybe it'll go on a roadmap. You've always been like, I love that idea. And then you like instantly get it on your list. And I'm sure you're doing the same, with ProcFu and GlobiMail and your other products. And if anyone hasn't taken a look at his stuff, I'll show you his web pages later. And that's something I've also really enjoyed about you is even though you are so into the techie, you with your users, you're just like, you're very in sync with them. You want to have that contact. You want to make sure that everyone can kind of collaborate on the future of what you're building. And I wish a lot more, companies big or small did that kind of thing. It's not, oh, my team handles this. You're always looking at innovating and improving. And I think that's just really fantastic.
Podio actually really helped with that. Because when I started GlobiMail, it was hard to, talk to people and figure out what they needed. But when I started GlobiFlow and I built that workspace in Podio for just GlobiFlow users, as the number of users there started increasing, it became a real community. And that really helped me understand what people actually use my stuff for and what their specific needs are. Because the thing about Podio is it's not like most other systems out there where you have a very specific niche use case and most of the customers are the same. With Podio, like the users are all over the board. They're using it for the weirdest stuff sometimes that you wouldn't imagine. So, to proactively build features is sometimes very difficult because you have no idea what people are going to be doing. So that community really helped for me to understand, what people are doing, what they need, what they want, what they don't want, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we still have that community. For everyone who's been on Podio for quite a few years, we've had our original community, we've kind of moved it, we're moving things around. But the GlobiFlow, the user forum community, it's still there, it's still active. And to be honest, I think we all learn a lot from those kinds of communities as well, where everyone's in there, everyone's engaged, coming up with ideas or how they're solving different problems in different ways, which is so possible in Podio and GlobiFlow and everything. There's 15 different correct ways to get something done. So to get that kind of feedback without having to constantly pull people or, set up a lot of interviews to talk to people, it's really, really important. And thank you very much for setting up that community. It's alive and thriving 10-ish years later after you sold it. And I still go in there sometimes to look of like, I'm trying to solve a problem. What have other people done? And it's a lot of times, even partners, Jacqueline, whenever I see her, I'm like, I would have never thought about that. And I just go and do exactly what she advised. And it's like, yeah, and that's what it's all about. I love it. And I'm hoping today to learn more about ProcFu for everybody else who's not using it. I've heard it does some really cool stuff. Do you have a similar type of community for the ProcFu users, or how are you managing that user forum? Oh, you do.
So all the products, that's GlobiMail, ProcFu, and PWA now. There is in-app, if you're logged in, there's always an option to join the workspace in Podio. And that's the easiest way to get into those workspaces. And they're very, very valuable, especially the PWA and the ProcFu ones.
Yeah, good to know. Good to know. Does anybody have any questions before we get started on really showing ProcFu? Any questions for Andreas, or I don't know, just say hi. You guys have reaction emojis capabilities, I hope. But if we don't have any questions, I will let Joel kind of take over with Andreas a little bit, and I'll still be manning the chat. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly. And I'm going to do my best to do this without going on mute or off camera because my allergies are killing me. So I apologize in advance. But before we jump into, some of the ProcFu interface and things that you can do, Andreas, for me, as a Podio customer, then as a partner, ProcFu was always kind of two main pieces, right? Mini apps and then the functions that were an extension, to Podio Workflow Automation. Before we jump into it, can you kind of give us a little bit of backstory on how those came to be and kind of what the main purpose of both of those is?
Yeah, sure. So the functions came first, and that's because I could no longer work on GlobiFlow. I couldn't add features, and I needed them, and users needed new features. So let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. So the first step was to build the functions that Joel had just mentioned. And this list was initially very, very small. But it only contained things that made sense for GlobiFlow to do, but I couldn't add anymore. So these functions came into existence, and let me just pick one as an example. Podio file search. All of them have parameters that you need to pass, and it will give you a result. So the way that works in PWA is, I have the first demo here. Now, what I'm using here is the ProcFu Chrome extension, which makes this a little bit prettier and makes it stand out. Maybe it's not prettier because it's black, but it makes it stand out and shows you this is actually a ProcFu call. But under the hood, it is nothing more than a remote post action. Which are these. So it's exactly the same action. To GlobiFlow doesn't know that it's a ProcFu call. It's just a Chrome extension, makes it a little bit easier to work with. So you would choose what you're calling. I don't know if you can see that. Is that too small? Maybe I'll make that a bit bigger. So you tell it which script that you're calling or which function you're calling, and you give it the parameters that the function needs. So in this case, we're creating an iCal invite from data of an item. So if I look for that same function over here, you give it Podio item ID, the date field, summary field, all those field IDs of the item in PWA that's currently being processed. And it'll take that information and create an iCal, which is a calendar invite, create it as a file and attach it to that item in Podio. So then you can email that or attach it as part of an email in your next action, and the person could then add that invite to their calendar. And I have an in-action tour here, the iCal demo. So if I add an item, and we'll just make it for today's date. And then it's a normal PWA action on update. It does the remote post, and you can see that it added, that Podio doesn't show it, let me refresh. It added the ICS file, which if I open it, will open in Gmail or Outlook or whatever you're using as your email client. From there, the next thing I developed, because these individual functions started becoming a little bit too many, and we wanted to be able to do more. So I actually wrote an interpreter that's very, very similar to an older version of PHP. And you can see that in ProcFu under the code section. And here I have an example where we're taking a given Excel file and we're going to sum up one of the columns. And all of that's going to happen in ProcFu. So in PWA, come on. So the PWA equivalent of that is we need to tell it what the item ID is and just call the ProcFu code block. So we're using the call ProcScript function. and we're telling it we want to call a piece of code called demo sum Excel, and the payload we're giving it is what we defined up here, which basically is just the item ID. Then what this code does is it uses some of the functions internally, like the file search. It'll search that Podio item looking for all Excel files. It'll then take the first one. It'll then parse using the Excel parse function. It'll parse that Excel file, go through all the rows, sum up the total column, and return just the total of all the totals. Which is if you were to do that or try to do that in PWA directly, it wouldn't even be possible. And if it would be possible, it would be really complex to do. And the way that looks then in Podio, I've already run this, but let's say I haven't run this before. This is just a visual of what the Excel file contains, but here's the actual Excel file. And if we trigger it, it'll call ProcFu. ProcFu will then go and fetch that Excel file. It'll iterate through all the rows, and it'll put up the total of all those values just within a split second. Bang.
How did you get your Podio bar to be, like it's more like a seafoamy type of color?
Yes, so this is part of the Super Menu Chrome extension.
Super Menu. Okay.
It does multiple things. One is it subdues the cyan VIC-20 color that Citrix lovingly introduced, which just personally to me kind of makes my eyes bleed. It also elevates things when you have notifications to make those pop out a bit more. It makes some of the buttons smaller. Like if you look at, the buttons, we're trying to maximize the real estate of your Podio data versus the interface. The interface should be discoverable, I think, not be in your face, at least once you're familiar with it. If you're a new user, yes, definitely don't use Super Menu for that. But once you're a power user, I just want to see my data.
And then I do have a question for you from Beth. I was going to ask the same question. I think it's the same one. How did you create a sheet Podio field? That is your Podio field or the button? I'm not sure.
If you're referring to what you see here, that is just a multi-line text field.
And then you have sheet as that orange button as well.
Edit with Super Menu. Mm-hmm. And when you edit with Super Menu, can you see the editor?
No.
No, I didn't think so, because that pops up a new window. But it basically just opens up a different editor to what Podio gives you that has some more power. And if you paste in something like an Excel sheet, it converts it to a table. If you paste in images, do I have an image? How quickly make an image?
You could paste in an image? I didn't know that.
There we go. So I can remove all that. Oh, I have to use the sheet option. So if I edit that with Super Menu, I can paste in an image of a screenshot I just made.
Oh my God.
Sorry, Kelly.
He's doing interviews with you.
Really quickly.
So you picked mine. Okay,
Sure.
Great.
I'll save
My
you
confused what?
But yes, you can paste images into the multi-line text fields. The README on Super Menu shows you the little things that it does and the bigger things that it does. And the bigger things are we can insert images into multi-line text fields using that button. And then the other one is, so this is what you'd see if I was only sharing a Chrome window, so a new window doesn't show on the call here. But if you have any table or app in Podio, you click the sheet button and you have a pop-up that gives you a spreadsheet of that data. And you can edit it more easily instead of going to each item individually. Let's say you want to update a category field with one value. You'd update one and then you'd copy and paste that cell to all the other cells you want to copy that value to.
Love it.
Mostly many apps are used for external users to create portals for things like customers, vendors, etc. You'd always start with a authentication table of some kind or app of some kind. This is for a demo, so I'm using plain passwords, but you can use MD5 passwords. I don't recommend doing the plain ones, but I needed to remember what the actual password is in order to showcase this right now. You don't want to watch me for 10 minutes trying to figure out and hack into a mini app. So you have the authentication app. In this case, I have the users, and I've built a little demo portal that lets you show where they can log in and see their orders. And then for each order, you have order items. It's a very standard and simple kind of setup. The way that's set up, this is the portal itself. So the user would only be able to see their own orders, and the way that works in Podio is the orders app basically has a relationship field to the customer, so the customer can only see their orders, which would be these. And then for each order, they would be able to see the order details and the order items. And because it's still in new, they'd be able to edit the order or create a new order. And in ProcFu, when you get into the app editor, the configuration for the app is pretty straightforward. Usually where you'd start is with the login screen, and that gets every app has a login screen. And from there, you tell it where to get the authentication details from. So in this case, I'm saying authenticate using Podio, using an app called Portal Users. The username is in a field called email address, and the password is in a field called password. Now, as I mentioned, you could also do MD5 password. Over here. So I could use username and password as MD5, which is a lot more secure. It's just a little bit more stuff you've got to do to MD5 your passwords in Podio. You can have a simple password where everybody shares the same password, which doesn't get used often. You can use Google authentication, and you can use Podio authentication as well if they already are Podio users. After that, on every screen, you tell it which screen it can go to next. So in this case, we went to the orders list. Now, most screens, there's a few different types. Like if I said add a new screen, there's a text information screen, which would be like Markdown. You just give some information to the user. The summary is your app view of all the records, and your detail record is of an individual record. Like those would be the two most used screen types in a ProcFu app. Yes, you can do dashboards. You can do, so there's some generic things like you can do a barcode scanner, little utilities, but the big ones would be the summary list and the detail record. When you click on an individual record, so you would tell it in the on click event, I want to go to view, and then the view would be a detail record screen type, where you can tell it exactly which fields you want to show, if you want to lock any of them, if you want to have comments, stuff like that. And again, it's just telling it to use Podio, use which app to use, and which mode. Is it in view, edit, or create? What ProcFu does behind the scenes is it tries to keep a context of everything that happens. So when you start with a login, right now for this example, there's a portal users app in Podio. So when you log in, there is a current record for portal users, which is the person that just logged in. So that becomes the context inside of ProcFu moving forward. So when you look at the orders, which is a summary list kind of screen, when you tell it that you want related items using whatever the current portal user is, well, the current portal user would be the guy that just logged in. And in the footer here, I'm embedding the, oh, not in this one, the items, the individual items for the order. And that also would be related again to an order, but because we're keeping context, it would be the current order you're looking at. So the order items match the order you have, which, like if I look at an order, these order items are for this particular order. I don't have to do any fancy filtering. I don't have to call the API in any weird ways. I can just tell ProcFu, give me the related stuff. And because it's in the footer of something, it knows, hey, the current context is we have an order, therefore these would be the related order items. With all of these screens, you do have code events. Sure, I have a couple here. You've got headers and footers. So what I did here was I inserted a button on the view. In my footer, I inserted another view, another screen. So that gives me, that's how I got the individual order items, even though they're a screen. Like I could get there. That's items view, right? It is physically a screen in the app, but the user will never be able to get there on their own. And I just embedded it in the actual order details screen so that you have one screen that shows you everything you need to see. There are, as I said, the code events. They sometimes become useful if you want to add more like logic into your app. In this case, I'm just saying if my status of the order is new, I can show an edit button, otherwise it's hidden by default, because I don't want users to be able to edit something that's been submitted or processed. And with the code events, I've seen some really complicated stuff. I don't want to get too heavily into that because that is more advanced. If you have certain logic conditions you need to be able to do, I would recommend go to the ProcFu workspace in Podio, and people can help you out there and you can see what other people have done. I think that more or less sums up what the mini apps do.
I can show kind of an example of something that was built out. And again, kind of thinking about the purpose of mini apps, you know, for me, when I was a partner, very similar to what, you know, Andreas showed there. You know, I had one Podio workspace in which I was managing, you know, all of my customer projects. Within projects, all of those related what I called work items, which were individual requests for a change or a new build or what have you. What was cool about mini apps is it gave me a way to have that back and forth interaction with each of my customers without having to go through all of this mess of, you know, who can access which items, which app, you know, all that kind of thing. So I can kind of walk you through, you know, it'll look very similar just with, you know, a bit more on the graphic side, but let me do this. So like I said, you know, as a partner, I was managing everything essentially out of a single workspace. In this record, I have just a test project. You know, I had a company, the project lead, you know, a bunch of other information. And we can see here, I had one test work item. If I were to open that up, that test work item lives here. And what I wanted to be able to do was handle that back and forth communication for, you know, when I had implemented a change or created a new build or an enhancement, I wanted to be able to, one, communicate that, you know, out to the customer, but two, give them a way to see, you know, what was changed, go through the details, and then be able to approve or decline that. So what I was able to do through ProcFu is from my Podio side, you know, I could come in and I could say, you know, this is ready to review. If I wanted to, I could put in, you know, usually what I would do is put in a Loom link to a video. I'll just throw in any kind of link, any screenshots, anything like that. And what I would do is I would move this to client review. Now, what that would do, working with ProcFu and Workflow Automation, is that would fire off an email to the client and let them know that, hey, there's something for you to go look at and review and either approve it or send it back for more work. So to Andreas's point, and again, I'm not by trade a web developer. I think this took me probably 2-3 weeks, just kind of hacking my way through, with some help from the communities and things like that, getting kind of the look and feel, working through some of the visuals. But what I was able to do was create something very similar to what Andreas just showed for our customers. So very similar. As a client, I could come in, I could see the project, I could drill into the details and see that the project date, it's a retainer, it ran for the current month. As it stands, no hours were used yet against that. But you can see here down at the bottom, for this month's project, I had this work item that's now tagged as client review. So again, going back through and leveraging all of the capabilities that you've got within the screens and what you're able to do, with a little bit of extra work, going through and creating these things to mirror up, what I was doing in Podio with what our customers could do here. So you'll see here now that there's this button, they've got the information, this is ready to review. And what was cool is it gave our customers the ability to right there say, all right, I want to, revise this, mark it complete, cancel it, do whatever they want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say complete work and save. And what that would do on the Podio side, or what we should see, is that should move now to client approved. If I haven't used this workspace in a while, so my testing was not very thorough, but the workflow would come back in, mark this client approved, and everything would be good to go. Like I said, with workflow automation, what it was doing in the background, is it's sending emails, to the client with the information, but also having links back to the portal. So I could click there and go right back to that item, from the email that was generated. So again, the look and feel, there's certainly been ProcFu portals that I know a lot of the partners have worked on. I've seen them built for customers that look light years, better than what this does, but without any real web development experience, I was able to go in and, like I said, in a couple weeks, create a portal for our clients to come in and interact with some of the work that we were doing while we were managing everything on the Podio side. So
That's
very
awesome.
cool.
Thanks, Joel.
yeah.
I've seen Martin, who's actually here in here with us. He's one of our partners. He does primarily with real estate. And it's the same thing here. You never think about how people are like using it until you see them use it, because you usually have like a specific kind of goal in mind. And he uses it where, property owners, they own the buildings or the house or whatever it is, and they need to hear or have, their tenants or renters submit things, but you don't want to add them to your Podio. You don't want them to have full access to even view everything. But he's built some really cool stuff, and you'll see in our real estate webinars of just little portals. So, if you have a ton of people, staff or tenants that just need to submit requests or follow up on jobs, they can use ProcFu through that portal. So it'll be, a little bit more professional, but it'll go directly back to your, original CRM of Podio, so that you can just get that intake without having to give access. So this is the page that has the websites. If you just go to globi.ca, you'll see a gigantic list. But these are all the links. We discussed some of them: Globi Mail, Super Menu, that kind of thing. ProcFu, obviously. If you want to contact Andreas, I was allowed to give his email here. Please do not Podio message him. He's too busy. But if you want to talk to him for any reason, there's his email address. Please email him.
All right. Thanks, everyone.